And we're live with our 238th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on social media, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on social media. Seth, say hi.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. We are happy to be back. It's March 19th. We're into 2024 at a pretty good clip now. We do have a couple of opportunities that we wanted to talk about, but before then, I did want to give a shout out to Impart Security for sponsoring today. Did you know that 41% of organizations, I lost my copy. Dang it. Let me try that again. Did you know that 41% of organizations have recently experienced an API security incident? Despite this, API security continues to be deprioritized. Why? Reasons include security teams not having an easy way to take inventory of all their APIs, challenges involved with continuous API monitoring and testing, and lack of flexible firewall rules to enforce API security. With Impart Security's API security platform, security teams can finally have an effective and pro-code friendly runtime protection that helps to proactively analyze, mitigate, and respond to ongoing API threats. Check out impart.security for more info. And along those lines, we are going to be having a happy hour at RSA. Watch this space for more information. That will be sponsored by Impart, Dry Run Security, Redpoint Security, and there might even be another sponsor coming on board that we will talk about soon. So thanks to Impart for sponsoring today, and watch out for the happy hour stuff if you are going to be at RSA. That'll be a good time to get together and to chat all things AppSec. Outside of that, we do have training opportunities that are coming up. We've got a few of them that are on the calendar right now. So first of all is KernelCon. That's just a couple of weeks away. This will be our first introduction into the use of LLMs in a secure code review and how Ken and I have been approaching it. I know Ken's been building a lot into Dry Run's new product, so you should talk to him and them if you're interested in how to automate some of that. But if you're just looking for hints on how to use LLMs against a code base, number one, in a secure manner, right? So you're not shipping all of your code or your customer's code off to a third party. Having an LLM available locally to you, we will be walking through that process, what we have found to be useful to speed up our analysis of code and identifying secure code bits. Ken and I were already going off on it pre-show today. So there's quite a bit there that actually, there's a lot that we're excited about when it comes to that use, right? So KernelCon, that's beginning of April. Let me post the link here. There are still seats available. There was touch and go there for a bit that we almost canceled that one just based on other factors with the conference itself and with availability and people there. But we are going to be there. We're going to be running that session. So come along if you can, right? This is a good opportunity to catch that first bit. Now, outside of that, the next opportunity after KernelCon is actually going to be in DC. There was some question of whether or not we were going to be in Europe at this time, but DEF CON is hosting a training in DC, and I'm popping that up there at the end of June. I want to say, yeah, it's June 27th and 28th. If you're in the Nova, Northern Virginia, DC area, you've been looking for the course, please come along, right? That's all I can say there. That'll be a traditional, but we will have the new LLM bits. I know that it's not listed on the DEF CON training site yet, the new outline with LLM and everything that goes into that, but we will be updating that one as well, and that will have all of those bits included. Ken, anything you want to say about the training, about the LLM stuff or upcoming events?
The only thing I was going to mention is that we've seen, and I say we as in the AppSec industry. You and I were talking about it beforehand. We've seen cutbacks in a number of different security budget places. One of those has obviously been layoffs that have impacted some of our community. And what I wanted to say there was we do know of folks that are looking for work, specifically W-2 or 1099 work. So if you are interested in an AppSec professional who, you're trying to fill a spot on your team, or you're trying to contract out some work to, let us know. You can reach out to me specifically at ken@absoluteappsec.com. Again, that's ken@absoluteappsec.com. You can also DM me on our Slack, but basically just trying to help out our community. Things seem to be picking back up in the budget space. And so now we're seeing that there's this talent out there available, but there are now roles opening up. And so it's good as I think a good way to connect our community with those that are looking for good talent. So anyways,
Yeah.
like I said,
And
reach out to me at ken@absoluteappsec.com if you want to be made in touch with those folks, put in touch with those folks.
And you can always check. There's a jobs channel. At times it's active. It seems like, we've got a couple of people when they've been looking for talent, they've dropped things in there. But yeah, reach out, right? Like, obviously, like, we want everybody to have a good home, and we want, everybody to be in jobs that they're happy about and excited about. So more than happy to help. Cool. Outside of that, there's been a lot of activity. I know Talos and Eric on the, in the Slack channel have posted some articles and some questions recently. Big shout out to both of them for, keeping the conversation going as well. There's quite a few people. I mean, at times I feel like we don't necessarily drive that general channel anymore, Ken. There's a lot of good stuff and good comments that go on there, which is exactly what we want to see, like, as the community grows. Sweet. All right. So first article for today, and this is from iCam Tough. And I know, like, I've read other stuff from him in the past. So the title of the article is Product Security Barking Up the Wrong Tree. And subtitle, AppSec is fine. We're not paying enough attention to corporate infrastructure risks. And I know you have some comments on this, Ken. So maybe I'll let you dive into it first up. Give me your thoughts on, ICAM stuff's like take here, right? Like, basically, well, first of all, like, what was the article? What was your takeaway from it? And then we can dig into opinions, because that's always the fun part.
I mean, I think, so where to begin? I think if you look at the article and we just briefly talk about what it's, I'm looking at the article. I'd read this obviously earlier. We talked about it. What it really comes down to is there has been a focus on a lot of the tooling around generating secure software, around if for some reason some of our tooling to detect issues in software reaching production misses things, usually there's a pretty expedited process to produce patches to protect customers. I guess the general gist, what he's trying to say there is that we've got it covered, essentially. I believe is the gist. Which, right? I mean, I get it, but what I will say though is I actually agree a lot with this take that we're really missing out on some of the basics, of enterprise security. So just to split that out, it's a juxtaposition of software engineering security vulnerabilities against enterprise security issues. And again, lots of processes, lots of tooling put into place for software engineering. But when it comes to enterprise security, you mentioned using a credit card to purchase, AWS assets for a prototype, which then, leads to a breach, or somebody uses a browser plugin they shouldn't have, and that leads to a breach, or just basic sort of hygiene type things like asset inventory not being performed. And this is where I say, yes, I'm an AppSec pro, but I actually agree with that sentiment that enterprise security is an interesting thing, and I only say that from the perspective of somebody who managed both at the same time simultaneously a red team and an AppSec team. And I felt like with the software engineering side, software security side, obviously no one's perfect. Obviously there's always room for improvement, but there were a lot of things that were kind of already there, good to go. Processes that were just being improved upon, iterated on, whatever. That having been said, when the red team, which was formed very close to when I took over as manager of that team, so their efforts were new, right? When they came in, some of the things they found actually were a little surprising to me, honestly. And it was some level of basic hygiene. And that's not to say that the team, because everybody knows this, I'm talking about GitHub. It's not to say that the GitHub team didn't do some great things, right? But my point is that even with all these great security people, all these great engineers, and all that, there were definitely some significant gaps that I was even surprised by. Which obviously that's why they purchased a red, or hired a red team, put money into it, put effort into it, and went and cleaned things up. From my understanding, that team works heavily with the detection side of things now. So I just want to say, in today's current state, it's not like that. But when they first came in, yeah, it was pretty. Well, I don't know. I can't speak to it. I would imagine it's great now. I'm trying to tread water carefully here, but at the time, I was very surprised, and it was basic. It was basic things, and even not at that one place. I will say, like, so Living Social doesn't exist now, so I can just say this. Before I left Living Social, I kind of just was very frustrated, and I left like this huge Google Doc. And Mike McCabe can actually speak to this. I left this huge Google Doc, and I said, you're not doing all these. This isn't even AppSec. This is just like hygiene. You're not doing these things, and this is like really risky and could lead to a breach. Well, I left. I think 2 or 3 months after I left, they were breached, and they were breached by the same things I put in that Google Doc. So, and it was basic hygiene type stuff, right? So I kind of like really relate to this article, but what are your thoughts? I mean, at the same time, I could see some of the devil's advocate side of this, and anyways,
Yeah,
I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
So, I mean, I feel like this is coming at it from an organization perspective that has like a number one that's been around for a little while. It's got like at least some budget, and they're pushing things in security and what their focus is. Part of this is probably has to do with the number of people that are involved with with software engineering versus security engineering, right? Like, when you're building a product like GitHub, you have thousands of developers, or at least hundreds of developers that are all building, slinging code that at some level, once you get past the basics, are thinking about security in the context of what they're producing, right? As opposed to security engineering is probably, a lower level. There's probably more products that are being slung there. Like there's more, caught stuff that's going on that there can be a weakness in. And I get that like my initial like gut feel when I read this is, man, you are just not seeing the same organizations that I'm seeing. Because most of the places that I step into, right, from a third party perspective, are not large organizations that are taking security seriously. And so where they actually apply their security budget usually starts on the enterprise side of things. It doesn't start at software engineering. It doesn't start at ProdSec, because they've got to have the basics in place to meet compliance requirements, right? As sad as that is, they have to be able to show their investors, they have to be able to show their compliance people or whatever customers are coming to them that they're doing phone scanning, that they're doing like the basic security hygiene stuff. Doesn't mean they don't make mistakes and there are problems with it, but they're usually way more mature there than they are with software engineering. ICAM Tough here seems to be saying that, hey, right, like we're good on ProdSec and AppSec, and we've got a lot of tools that are available. I don't necessarily see that, right? Like yes, I do with large organizations like GitHub, like Netflix, like and I could list off some others, but it's I have a hard time taking this too seriously when I see the basic hygiene and the AppSec 101 stuff failing on a daily basis, right? So like, yes, you've got to concentrate on both. And maybe what he's like, maybe the takeaway is, yeah, like from a coverage perspective, like what's out there in the media, I guess, that like we have a focus on ProdSec and the tools that are available and what's, up and coming. And we're letting enterprise slip, but I don't necessarily see that on a day-to-day basis. That's my takeaway. I don't know if you're starting to experience more of that, Ken, coming from the the vendor side of things as you're being like pushed into new code bases. But that's definitely like my experience within the last couple of years.
I think from my experience has been most people know what they definitely don't want. From a vendor perspective anyways, like from a tooling and detection and just the way it operates, they definitely have some things they absolutely know they want. Most people struggle with similar things. I would definitely say that and that's just from the tooling side, and we all know that like software security is just such a it's so layered, and there's so many factors, and it's a complex thing. It's why we have been on air for I don't know 6 years or something like that talking about it, and we still each week have something more to say. So it's a never ending field, I'd say. But I guess what probably prompted this article, from what I can gather, is that there was there's been regulation around software security as of recently, like the C++ article that has
Yeah.
popped up multiple times in our channel regarding the White House and all that stuff and their regulations. And I think really what what Michael is trying to say here is that the essentially maybe I don't know, because I've reread this last paragraph a bunch of times, but it says the narratives of market failures are unfalsifiable, and it's the nature of all bureaucracies to amass influence and expand. But I think we're barking up the wrong tree. And that last sentence makes me think that Michael believes we should be producing regulation for enterprise security, hygiene related things, which I don't disagree with. I mean, that having been said, that's sort of that's the reason that we've got all these various compliance standards to include government federal ones such as FedRAMP. And I know that's not the end all be all blanket for this, and that covers a very specific set of technology. I get that. My point is there has and will be compliance around all of this standards for quite a while, and people still don't get it right. So I don't know if more regulation is the answer necessarily. And then, what you hear is like, well, then the punishments must be harsher. That's usually the other argument. And I don't agree with that either. I mean, I guess, well, I don't know. It doesn't, I'm not saying it'll work. I'm just saying, I don't think it, I'm not saying it'll work. I'm saying, should it philosophically be a worse outcome for someone that disregards basic hygiene? I don't know.
I think, I think the market does, it will punish people, right? Like, you start talking about breaches, you start talking about negative publicity, right? Like you start to like think about like in the engineering space, think about Boeing over the last few weeks, right? over the last couple of
Oh
months,
yeah.
right? Like what they're going through. And it's because they've taken their eye off the ball from an engineering perspective, right? Like, and whatever, go watch the John Oliver episode on it, or like whatever you want to do, right? Like, but seeing how chasing money versus security ends up eventually biting a company in the ass, right? Like that's what's going on there. And I would like to think that that does happen in the security space as well, as you have breaches and other things. It's not always the case, but from a trust perspective, I know that the second there is something like a breach, that it comes out, that it like the normals, I guess, or like people that aren't in the industry actually, note that. I get a lot of questions when that happens on, hey, can I still trust this organization? Like they lose brand value, whatever you want to call it, when an exploit happens. And I mean, uh, Larry in the Slack channel, yeah, you wondered how much of this was based on ICAMTough's role as VP of Snap, or um, or his versus his previous role at Google, right? Like, and both of those organizations are incredibly mature in the security space. They just are, right? Um, and there's no getting away from that. Yeah, I'm not quite sure where I'm going with this, right?
Well, we have talked about security scorecards on products
Yeah,
before. We even heard that proposed with producing your S bombs at that oh gosh, that S bomb talk we went to at Cactus Con. I can't remember the apologies. I can't remember the speaker or
yeah,
the title. But anyways, it was that was the gist of it. Trying to again, one idea is regulatory government stuff, and like the other is the free open market capitalism side of things, which can work to our benefit to push people away or towards a more or less secure product. And at the same time, that's again, that's talking about software security. So I mean, from an
yeah.
enterprise security perspective,
Well,
I would
I
say
don't
this
know.
though, even if the company's doing a great job, I would argue though, if you were to ask, like let's say they're doing a great job and they have a red team and all that, I have never to date met people that see how the sausage is made and are like, yeah, we're doing a good job. It's always like the org's messed up, this is messed up, that, and it's like, well, yeah, that's not wrong, but also like priorities and reality, and
Mhm,
so I get it. I get where I don't know. I agree with both are important, but
mhm.
I've seen the enterprise side fail so miserably that I can't say that he's completely wrong on some of these
Oh
points.
yeah.
I just wouldn't
I
say
mean,
it's
I can't.
it's a software security versus enterprise security thing. I don't think
No,
that's. And he
no.
said this, like at the end, he says this is red herring, but I think in this article that's the red herring. It's like, yes,
Yeah.
I don't. That has nothing to do with. No, you're right though. You have a point. Enterprise security needs a little bit more love there, in terms of focus. But what kind of focus? I guess is the open question that I have.
Yeah. Yeah. I and I think it's going to come down to your organization, right? Like you really should be doing a prioritization to see where your like maturity exists, right? What the compliance regulations are that you have to meet, and like I said, right, like most organizations that I'm being pulled into, it's probably my own blinders are on because I'm pulled into places where product security or application security is deficient, when we're helping them build that program. And the people that are running enterprise security realize that, and so, hence the reason that I'm being engaged. So I definitely have a different take on this because I'm not embedded in an organization that really has application security figured out. There's a reason that I harp on Crocs and socks. There's a reason that I harp on logging, because I don't see it in the companies that I go into, or if I do, it's extremely deficient as opposed to what you have at some of those larger organizations, since they are doing what they should be doing. So it's all a matter of perspective. Take it with a grain of salt, and then apply it to the organization that you're in.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like I'd like to touch on that last point you said, like perspective. I am a CTO of a startup. You cannot imagine. I mean, you can. right? But most people cannot imagine the amount of competing priorities that I face on a single day. I get messages from people that are like, "Hey, hi, you must be really busy. I haven't heard from you in a few days." Yeah, when I say competing priorities to the extreme, I mean it. And that that means that I see how this all happens and unfolds in an organization that gets to be a medium-sized organization from the very beginning. I understand very well now, even at a company whose focus is security, why there is a this or that. You have to choose. Everybody wants to do everything and prioritize everything. It is not That is not the reality. Unless you somehow It's just not reality. There's no magic. You have to prioritize. You have to this or that
Yeah.
all the time.
Yep. Yep.
And so that leads to a point where, and if you've done a good job with this or that, then you've gotten to a point as a business where now you can hire security people to help come in and fix those problems. And ideally, they do focus on fixing those problems. But And obviously, you try your best to secure everything as much as possible, but that is not your only priority as a business owner. It's definitely not. Definitely not. And like I said, it's a this or that constantly. So
Yep.
I don't know. I also think sometimes security can forget that. Not to say that I think our viewers are here for the practical conversations and the reality, and they get all that. But there's a lot larger swath of infosec communities out there that aren't us and aren't our community that take a more like, oh, it has to be this or that kind of approach, and
Yeah.
that's not good for anybody.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. You talk about like, competing priorities, right? Like, running a small consulting firm and then, having to answer, risk assessment questionnaires. I like, yeah. And
Yeah,
then the risk
yeah,
assessment questionnaires are geared toward like the software as a service or, something else. And, them coming back, well, yeah, you guys don't have a dedicated staff that are, that is running your SOC. I'm like, man, guys, like we're 5 people, right? Like, and we're all
yeah,
security consultants. Like, what do you want from me, right? Like, I'm not going to go hire somebody to do this because it's a waste of time and money. Well, that gives you like a high residual risk, and I'm like, okay, right? Like, put it in there as a high residual risk, and just like I'm going to walk out the door. It just, I'm like. And it's not like the people that want my services; it's the GRC folks that are assessing organizations.
yep,
And I understand where it's coming from. I do, right?
yep,
Like we've been on both sides of this equation. I understand where it's coming from and I understand why you've got to give it that ranking. Um, but then on the flip side, I'm like, really? Right? Like, we're, what we're looking at, what we're going to have access to is not the same as somebody that's digging into your internal core and all of your customer records and all the financials that are going on. And so it's just that it's that threat and the risk prioritization and how stuff gets applied is very it's very ad hoc. Number one, it's very it's based on interpretation of whoever it is that's doing the assessment. And I mean, I'm sure you're running into this as well because you are touching people's code, right? And that becomes the crown jewels
oh,
for most organizations. And so the second that you start to touch that, or you have vulnerability data because we discovered a huge critical issue in whatever it is, uh, yeah, like there's a level of trust that goes on there, and there's a level of discipline that needs to be had on our side, on their side, to actually handle that data appropriately. Um, and it just, it's just the prioritization is difficult. And I think Hoodie Pony, who's back, hi Hoodie Pony, um, talks about like, prioritization sucks. And it's just resourcing
yeah,
constraints when you're in a small business or in any business, right? So, ICAM stuff is talking about like, hey, what is it that he's dealing with at his level? What does he have to prioritize? And it seems like ProdSec's handled. So enterprise is where he's falling down. All right. Or the organization, not him specifically or their organization, but that's where he needs to put his new dollars, or like the focus needs to to change a little bit and priority needs to change because they've got other stuff covered. But on my side, I don't see that as often. So that's all. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Larry brought up this quote: "Your security team is pitted against the sum of human ingenuity. You work to lower the base rate of security lapses, but even with the best tooling and education efforts, there's that 1 or 5% you're bound to miss." Then goes on to say he's right where we're going to miss stuff because we can't always know about everything that's going on. I still think it's a bit of a problem in spreading this last one. This last sentence, this is really hitting the nail on the head. I still think it's a bit of a problem in spreading the responsibility so everyone has an active interest, and that really is a tough thing. And that's the human part. That's the hard part. That's the part where it's like, again, if you're somebody who has different things in life going on and at work and all these things, it's like you want to invest, you want to care, but you can only care so much, and it comes down to what things should I care about today, and what really sometimes that's for some of us, that's what should I care about in the next 30 minutes. It varies,
Yeah.
right? So it's just a very hard problem to solve, no matter how much you incentivize, you know,
Well, and
intrinsic
we're always going to miss it, right? Like,
motivation.
I like the 1 to 5% you're bound to miss, because um, I feel like that 1 to 5% exists in every security discipline. It's not just enterprise security, application security. People make the same mistakes. They pull in a framework they don't understand. They utilize it in a poor manner. But we've got mechanisms. He's right, to actually catch that. In a large organization, you've got things like bug bounty. You're doing your assessments. You're doing your scanning. That should actually find some of it. You're doing some logging and auditing, right? Like whatever it is. But that's how you have to catch it from a threat perspective. And maybe this is it, like where you have to push back to what is the enterprise threat? Like, what is it that we should be concentrating on? Because there's a lot of organizations that don't necessarily do that at a high level, right? There's a lot of, hey, what about this specific feature? What about this specific application? But overall, what is it that the organization is most concerned about? Where should they actually apply those security efforts and security dollars, and then roll back from there? Again, prioritization sucks, though. Right?
Definitely.
Lord and Savior AI, yes.
Yeah, when you're
Sweet.
talking about doing things securely with LLMs and AI, I was like, yeah, we've had private conversations, but yeah, I look forward to companies using AI, not realizing that there's a lot of things that they can't actually use, and then adjusting their products around it.
Yep.
Anyways, all right, so that seems like we've covered that topic pretty well.
Yep. Yep.
Uh,
If you have
yes,
more
I
thoughts,
also
jump
love
into Slack.
LLMs too, Charles.
Yes. Yep.
Sorry,
I
Seth.
find more and more ways to use them. So I did want to pop this in there, and actually, this is a great use, right? Asking an LLM what a hash actually is. But there was this new project. I just wanted to mention it in passing before we get into that other article or the other paper from DoyenSec. This Haiti project. It's a new one for identifying hashes that you discover, right? Identifying what the hash mechanism was, right? Like whether it's MD5, SHA-256, if you're seeing password hashes, does it actually have something in there? I was telling Ken before the podcast started today, I can't count the number of times that this need has come up for me multiple times, right? Like in the course of a year, that we discover hashes, or we're seeing something that we're not quite sure what it is. And so being able to call back to the actual hashing mechanism is very useful. So, take it with a grain of salt. That's this Haiti project that came in, I think, through TLDRsec. Shout out to Clint for actually including that there, but it's a useful tool, just something else to add to your repertoire. And they also go through kind of the other hash identification projects that are out there. We'll hope that it keeps up. But it could be that we could just turn to an LLM and ask an LLM what the hash is and see how that does. But I haven't necessarily done that as much. I'll have to play with that one a little bit.
Yeah, so there's
Uh,
certain things like that where I would actually say deterministic methods might
mhm.
be a better approach with maybe some LLM bits on the back end fed with the right context to help kind of contextualize it maybe, but like in the grander scheme of the code. But from just a pure what is this and what is it, what is it like, what protocol like that deterministic method seems like a really good. That's the interesting thing, is figuring out when to use deterministic methods, when to use probabilistic methods. But that's a talk for an entirely. It's not even a talk. That's like a lecture. But anyways,
Yeah.
yeah, I think this is really cool, man. I saw this and I was like, oh, this is neat. Yeah, because like, yeah, you end up trying to figure out what the heck am I looking at here. Something that can automatically do this is really, really
Well,
nice.
yeah. And I mean, this comes into play quite a bit when we're dealing with like APIs, right? Like we're calling an API, we're getting, certain data back, sometimes it is like password hashes and other things, right? Like, and that isn't the norm by any stretch. But things like, just a hash value attached to a file, right? Like, and, sometimes they don't tell you what they're actually using to generate that hash, or, what have you, but, actually signing or, hashing requests. You can see it in the code, or it's obfuscated by JavaScript before it's being sent to the API, right? There's a whole bunch of use cases here that come into play that aren't necessarily right. Like I'm trying to identify a password hash, but having the tool in your tool belt is useful. That's all. Right.
Yeah, nice.
Sweet. Okay. Good. So let's get into software composition analysis then, to close things out
Yeah,
today.
this
So
one's gonna be.
DoyenSec.
We're gonna have to
Yes.
like cut ourselves off on this one because this could go for a while. Good thing we only
Yes.
go for an hour because yeah, we have a
Yeah.
hard stop.
hmm So
Or
okay.
I'll put it
So
into
DoyenSec.
general.
Yeah. Yep. You've got it in there. Okay. Um, yes. So looks like BSD Bandit's giving a talk. Where's that at? On hacking APIs. Okay. So let me actually share this. And there is a PDF that we're going to want to dig into about software composition analysis here shortly as well, from DoyenSec and the research that they've done. But we're just looking at the blog post, first of all, as it came across. DoyenSec does audits, right? Like very similar to what we do. Part of that is SCA, the software composition analysis. And they are looking at three well-known and well-used tools in the space. So Sneak, SemGrep, and Dependabot. They like to automate things, and they basically wanted to do a head-to-head comparisons of the SCA functionality of those tools. And yeah, so their research comes out, and we'll dig into the PDF itself of the research here shortly. The comparison, though, chart comes across as fairly damning. I'm going to be honest. The fact that of the tools that they analyzed, and we'll look at the methodology, what they actually did here shortly, but the fact that Dependabot and Sneak come back with so many false positives as opposed to true positives, in comparison to what SemGrep actually was able to identify and do, is definitely a turnoff when it comes to what the data that's coming out of Dependabot and Sneak. It just is. As a practitioner, as someone that is trying to advise people how to build secure code and what they should actually be using, if Dependabot is coming back with this many false positives, I have a hard time like taking those results and pushing them back to a client without putting a whole bunch of time into using Dependabot or into tracking down what Dependabot is giving me. And I can't really justify spending 2 to 3 hours to reduce those false positives down. And I'd be looking at this from an application security, like if I'm running a ProdSec or an AppSec team internal to an organization, if the number of false positives are magnitudes, like return magnitudes, or like a magnitude greater than like 10 of true positives, is that tool very useful? It's not like I'm spinning my wheels so much with just based on these results. And I'm going to be providing details to developers that are not useful. And I'm going to be hurting the relationship that I have with developers by pushing these results to them. Right. I don't know, Ken, like, what are
Yeah.
your thoughts, first of all, like on
Oh,
the comparison chart and the
oh.
analysis and what they're doing here?
Well, hopefully we're going to see how well my sound canceling works, because my dogs are about to absolutely freak out at some dogs across the street. Knock it off. Uh, anyways, so I don't have to give my opinion. I have been on a ton of customer calls, right? And design partner calls. So we just keep asking, what are essentially the problems? Like, because I have my idea of how a tool that basically protects your code that's changing should work, and how you can protect essentially your software as stuff gets developed. But I'd rather hear what people's concerns are. So that's how and James and I, my co-founder, that's how we run these calls. We kind of just ask, like, what are your problems that you're facing? So people keep coming to us because, frankly, Sneak costs a lot of money. And I'm just going to be honest. It's just, that's there's two main things. One is Sneak costs a lot of money. And two, its SCA component produces a lot of noise. And I won't even talk about the SaaS part about it, but since we're talking about SCA, I'll just limit this. What I've found from call after call to be true is that the noise from this tool is unproductive, to the point where between the cost and that, people just basically are running away from it. There's some other issues I won't get into because they're not related to this conversation. And I'm not saying this because I'm trying to put Sneak down. Not at all. I mean, not at all. Just because one part of your tooling has some flaws, like, come on, like, I get it. But anyways, it's pretty bad from what people keep telling us. And here's what I can say on this note. People keep asking us, well, does your tool do SCA? And for very good reasons, I have no interest in doing SCA as of right now. That may change over time, but for right now, just not really interested in it for a number of reasons, which we'll get into. But anyways, getting back to it. So that's the major complaint I keep hearing.
Mhm.
People seem to say that what ends up happening is that their engineers essentially backlog things to the point where it just doesn't get done, or
Mhm.
they get pinged and brought into the, like, hey, can you validate this? And then the security team themselves don't have time and just say, accepted risk, backlog it. It's just not been a very and I'm not talking about Sneak, I'm talking about SCA in general. Like, this is true for Dependabot as well. SemGrep is the one I don't have a lot of feedback on from people. I just don't, but I do for Dependabot and Sneak. And so what it just ends up getting ignored is what I'm trying to say, indefinitely. It's very problematic for people. Um, the core complaint I hear about, what really bothers people, is that they'll get these alerts, but then the library is not used, or the part of that library that's vulnerable is not used. And that leads me to the next part, just real briefly, about what they did in terms of their approach on reachability. So one of the big parts of their testing, being, oh gosh, what is it, DoyenSec or something like that? Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yep.
Um, they're going to be like, no, it's DoyenSec. I don't know, whatever. Anyways, or not say anything at all. They limited their analysis to reachable libraries, or using components of these tools that are supposed to, what am I trying to say? Options within the tools, each tool, that are focused just on reachability. So I guess with these tools, you can, pass a configuration option to say, hey, only give me the stuff that's allegedly reachable, right? So that's what they tried to do. Now it looks like with SemGrep, that I forget what about it, but there was something with SemGrep where I was like, it seemed like SemGrep was definitely going to have an advantage here. I forget why.
Yeah.
That's a
Well,
really big
it's
thing that I'm
because
forgetting here.
they chose the vulnerable libraries based on SemGrep being able to reach some of those, right? Like, so that's what I'm
Right,
showing
right,
here is their
right.
research methodology. So
Yes, thank
SemGrep
you.
definitely did have an advantage, or there was a bias towards SemGrep in the data set that was chosen. So, and I mean, it would be interesting to take that on the flip side and like use the reachability analysis from Sneak or from Dependabot or whatever else, and then flip it on its head, right? But or just dependency check, right? Like whatever it is, right? So there, you do have to take it with a grain of salt. Like this is the reason why we wanted to dig in a little bit on their methodology, because they did, they had a couple criteria, and that's what I'm showing up on the screen right now, right? Like the vulnerabilities had to be in direct dependencies, not dependencies of dependencies, had to be reachable, right? Like, that's where they pulled it from. And then it has to be critical or high severities, right? So something that would impact the application that was using it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually let's talk about some of their testing. So in terms of languages, it was JavaScript, Python, Ruby, and Java that they tested against. They selected 1,000 of the GitHub's top rated candidate repositories. Candidate repositories are ones that have had 5 commits in the last 10 months. I was really confused on this sentence, so maybe you can figure this out. Because I was like, wait, is this saying the latest commit going back 10 months, or is it saying the latest commit starting 10 months ago? It says this was meant to give all the tools and opportunity. Not that it matters. I'm just curious. This was meant to give all the tools and opportunity to have no, sorry, wrong one. From there, we clone the repositories from the most recent commit that was at least 10 months prior. That sentence breaks my brain. I'm probably just stupid,
Okay.
but I don't know.
No.
I don't
So
really
so
understand that.
basically what they did is they didn't take any commits after that were newer than 10 months ago, right?
Okay, that's what I was
So
thinking.
yeah.
Maybe,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
my
all right.
understanding is basically they rewound and said, okay, this commit was from 10 months ago or prior to that. Um, because it's had 5 commits in the last 10 months that have supposedly either fixed these vulnerabilities or what have you.
Gotcha. Thank you for the clarification there. You is a smart Seth. Right. So, what are the other last thing that was of note? Uh, there was one other detail, if I remember, that I thought was interesting in their testing methodology, not in a bad way, and like just interesting. Yeah, so they scanned all of those, and this is where the for CVEs, and then they did some analysis. I think honestly, when we get to the top part where the part of this whole report, if I had to summarize the part that was most just depressing, honestly, if anything, it had nothing to do with the tools. Well, I guess I can't say it has nothing to do with the tools. It absolutely has something to do with the tools. But even if the tools are really good, how much time it takes to validate each one of these vulnerabilities. They have a chart here. Oh, where is it? Yes, if you go down to page 10, and
Mm-hmm.
you look at Dependabot
Yeah.
1353. Yeah, there you go. All right. So this was the part that for me, Seth, was just absolutely depressing because we know who's doing it. It's us, it's champions, it's engineers. If you ever find an engineer, by the way, side note, who is like loves doing upgrades on dependencies, never let that engineer go. Anyway, so Dependabot, 1,353 minutes to validate the positive findings with 12% being valid. SemGrep, 148 minutes to validate the positive findings, with 83% being valid. But again, I do want to caution the SemGrep one's a little. Not that I do, because I like SemGrep. I think SemGrep's awesome. I've said it a million times. But I do want to caution that one's a little. These are a little bit more targeted. The SemGrep rules. Sneak is 1,046 minutes to validate the positive findings, with 9% being valid. What that really means is on average, it took 12.3 minutes of focused time, free from interruptions. Okay, good luck. Per vulnerability to determine its existence. This and then it says, this will obviously vary with complexity of the code, the specific vulnerability, and the skill and experience of the engineer performing the rules or reviews. Yeah, this is a person whose only job is to focus on this thing, right? That's my point. Imagine I sit there and I give a task that's going to take over 1,000 minutes to validate to my engineering staff, and they don't have that skill set, right? Because it's really, those are the folks who are going to be upgrading these, and they're going to be the ones coming to your security team asking. But at scale, like, how do you realistically, especially with the hiring cuts that we talked about in the very beginning of this episode? So you got, what, if you're lucky, a couple people doing software security, if you're lucky. And now those people are they going to go and do that? Absolutely not. You know what their day looks like? They're absolutely not doing that. So who's doing it? People that aren't skilled. It's going to take them a long time, is my point, and it may not be. So now, going back to the original article, they made a statement that this is where I'll just give my very opinionated stance, where it's like, we should stop doing SCA. I don't know if I go that far. I don't know if I say we should not upgrade our dependencies that are vulnerable, but I do agree that the way we're going about it is just terrible for everybody. Nobody loves it. This is the biggest complaint I get. Like I said, I get on these calls. People are trying to replace their expensive SAST and this and that tools with us, and that's where we get to that sticky point about SCA, and it's like, well, are you doing SCA today? Yeah. How's it going? Pretty shit. Doesn't work. Doesn't do anything for me. So you want that again? Well, I want it, but better. And it's like, okay, well, we can talk about better and different ways to approach it, but like doing it in this way, I don't love. So anyways, that's my very opinionated stance there.
No, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Cause and again, shout out to DoyenSec on this, like the research here, right? Like, cause I don't want to spend 24 hours, analyzing Dependabot results and seeing if they're actually there. But there's a long tail associated with this that they don't really dig into either, right? Like, so they only analyze high and critical vulnerabilities. What about all the medium,
right,
the low, the informational, right? Like, that those all end up in the backlog, and that Dependabot, that, SemGraph and Sneak are reporting those as well. And at that point, you have to do analysis on whether or not it raises to the level of a critical, especially when it's combined with other vulnerabilities that are in those dependencies. It's just like this massive research project that you're assigning to, your interns, because no one else on your team has the time or whatever to do it. And they have no understanding of any of the concepts that are involved. And it's just, it's a huge issue, right? Like, I can't tell you the number of times, I go back and forth because known vulnerable components, right? It shows up on every single report that we write. And I don't know how useful it is. Like, that is something that I get back from most of the respondents is, well, what should I actually upgrade here? Right. And usually, like, my typical response is, do what you can, but don't spend too much time on this, because it's probably not going to move the needle, right? Like, you want to stay up to date for a multitude of reasons. But if this is the only reason that you're upgrading a package is because it was listed as a low vulnerable, like it had some, problem with the regex or whatever it is, right? Like, if that's the only reason that you're upgrading it, it's going to be, you're going to be hard pressed to show that that's an actual issue that should be prioritized over a new feature or whatever else it is that you're trying to do as a software engineer. Right?
Well, and further exacerbating this, Seth, is the fact that now people have bought into this. I should say bought into, because I'm not saying it in a negative. It sounds negative. I don't mean this in a negative way. I just mean people have really been. What's a better way to say this? I don't know. They've been on the kick to sort of implement SBOMs, and now why I say that is actually some of the people that we've talked to are required to generate SBOMs for the companies they work with for the B2B stuff, right? So they actually have to produce SBOMs, which then means they have to use these SCA tools, which then means it's literally foot guns all around. It's just, yeah, it's like, are we doing the right thing in software security sometimes?
Well, no, I don't know. I realize like where the instinct comes from, right? Like if we talk about packages from, environments, right? Like you're talking about Linux packages, you're running an instance of Red Hat somewhere, and it's out of date and running out of date packages. Yeah, of course you want to go upgrade those. The problem that we run into with dependencies, and I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but the problem we run into is that it's not always straightforward to upgrade dependencies. And then when you start to talk about like package lock files, package files, how do you define those dependencies and what's available and what can be used and pulled in, right? Like it's the instances when you're building software don't always line up with what the SCA tool is assuming that you're using. And so we've got just like a multitude of, yeah, to your point, we've got a multitude of foot guns here, right? And if we have to expose those S bombs in a B2B scenario, we're going to want to put it at, put our best foot forward, but we're tied to whatever framework the developers chose 5 to 10 years ago to build this specific application, and whether or not we can actually like reduce that risk, or whether or not the company that we're talking to is going to accept what we're doing from a security perspective becomes a whole other issue, right? Like I'm I feel like we're making a mountain out of a molehill a lot of times, right? And organizations do this when they're like assessing someone else's security, right? I can't tell you the number of times that I've advised, a client, they're trying to sell their software to, someone else, and the bigger organization comes in and is like, well, you have to go implement X, Y, and Z, even though that organization themselves are not doing the same thing, right? Like their internal process does not necessarily follow the standards that they're requiring of other people. And man, I don't know, man. I keep jumping to different topics because there's so many
There's so many
there's so
things
many
to
places
pick
to trip
apart.
up. Yeah, there's so
Yeah.
much to pick apart. Exactly. I don't know what
I
you
mean,
recommend here. Yeah.
this, and I was just gonna say, I mean, to your point, that's why I really loved this share that you, because this article, I really do appreciate them putting together this PDF and putting together this article, because we joked for the last year or two, I'd say, about, oh yeah, SEA, okay, cool, right? Like we always joke like, oh yeah, that SEA thing. But you know, it's really not funny when you read it. Like when someone puts on the paper the hell that people live every day, it's kind of not funny anymore, right? It's like this is shitty. Like this is bad. And even if you have like, and also one other note too, I know there's so many points to hit on here, but first let me just finish that out. Thank you to you folks for building this, or for putting this research out there. Really appreciate that. And anyways, going back to it though, one of the other points that is actually really interesting that I come across on every single call is that, and I know I mentioned this in Slack, but I'll just reiterate here because this PDF touches on it. People are way more okay with uh, false positives or excuse me, false negatives than false positives. Like
Mhm.
anything that has a lot of signal that's false signal, uh, immediately bad. Even if it misses stuff, people would, because like even in the SemGrep example, they missed a lot of stuff, but you know they didn't. They also didn't produce a lot of noise, so and it's quick, so that's essentially what people are looking for. That's what I'm realizing too. People want just the thing that can find mostly can find the high signal stuff and just doesn't put out a lot of noise. And anything that puts out a lot of noise, even if it's like doing the best, most sophisticated analysis, whatever, it's just going to be trashed by the end user. The customers will not want it. People won't use it. And even if they buy it after some time, they'll say, okay, well, time for a new contract.
Yep.
Just a
Well,
just something
yeah.
I'm really continually somewhat surprised by, right? Because I would think you want the thing that's going to find all the things, but it does make sense though that in a practical sort of day to day, you don't want something that's super noisy, because yeah, then people have to
Yeah.
do work that isn't like we pointed to on those statistics, over 1,000 hours of, review. So anyways.
Yeah. Actionable results and recommendations are so much more valuable than one off or like stuff that is not like this, just busy work, right? And a lot of the automation that I end up doing for clients is specifically around this, right? Hey, we have this DAS scanner, or we've got this SCA tool that is generating thousands of alerts or thousands of findings a day. How do we actually take the items out of that are valuable to give to developers, so we don't, number one, overwhelm them, but number two, give them something that's actionable and improve security of our organization and our product. I think this is where, like, the stuff that you guys at Dry Run are doing, right, with LLMs, but even just LLMs in general, will be able to help us refine that from a pattern perspective. Once we can identify which of those are true positives, and what the patterns around that true positive, like what that meta information is, an LLM would actually be able to analyze that fairly quickly and could reduce that time. But it's still going to take a person, right? It's still going to take somebody to
Uh,
actually filter through that and to identify those patterns,
yeah.
right?
And even if you use an LLM, yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is even with an LLM, you and I were actually literally just talking about this before the call. Is like, even if you use that, people have this misconception, and I saw it with like the chatter we had in the Slack yesterday, where it was like, they can't even compete in this research paper with DAS. And it's like, well, yeah, they're building they're giving you an idea of what the capabilities of LLMs are if they were to use an agent, for instance, to start making requests on behalf. The LLM gets to make requests, analyze responses, make further follow-on requests, and all that stuff. That's an interesting. I don't care who you are. That's interesting. That is interesting. If you think that's stupid, all right, that's your opinion, but I think that's interesting. It's a way to use the tool in a different way, but that's what we have to remember about LLMs. It's just a tool. A lot of there's limitations. There's context window length limitations. It is probabilistic analysis. It is designed to produce different answers upon each response. You can do a lot of things to toy with that, but that's its job. Ultimately, what you need to know is you have to have very specific sets of questions about very specific sets of things. You have to provide the right context and the right information within the right context length, and you have to do all of that simultaneously to get any kind of actionable, useful advice. It is such a thing, though, that it can behave almost like a code reviewer. So if you put an LLM, for instance, on a certain code base, you need to map it out. You need to have key markers for the compositional analysis, because you can't feed it just like all of the code at once. Usually, I mean, there's supposedly 120K token limit with Gemma, the new version of Gemma, or something like that. But we're not there yet for most stuff that's available. So you do have to, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is you have to break things down into reasonable amounts. You have to know that you have to treat it as if it's a code reviewer person, and only that, right? So you need to be the one that gives that's the true intelligence behind everything, and just use it as the probabilistic analysis tool that it is. Too often I see this thing of like, because there's so much, there are a lot of research papers out there, and I understand the knee-jerk reaction by security to be like, oh, this is FUD and all that stuff. But I think what needs to be understood is that a lot of the space of LLM is so new that people are just looking for different practical applications of it. And it's more of like, here's an idea of how this could be used, and here's how you could innovate and build on top of that. Again, remember, this ecosystem is very, very, very new. That's how we innovate. That's how we accelerate and build on top of each other and evolve. Is like, someone puts out a little interesting thing here, someone puts out a little interesting thing there. Yes, for the purposes of eyeballs, it gets a bit clickbaity. People go off and then sometimes spout like, this is the equivalent of a DAST, for instance, like with that article that was in Slack. It's like, no, it's not an equivalent of DAST. It is literally an LLM. Regardless of the title, if you dig into the meat, it's an LLM using agents to make requests, process the information, and perform further analysis, and then do that over and over again. That's all.
Yeah.
That's really all it is. And so anyways, like, I'm on this tangent because, like, I've spent so much time in LLMs, and I keep hearing from security people their take, who, no offense, but I don't feel like could have possibly spent as much time as I've spent inside of this world right now. And it's not a silver bullet, but it's not that scary. The only thing that does scare me about LLMs, the only thing that scares me about LLMs right now, big scare, is the ecosystem around it, right? That's the one that bothers me the most. I think that we are in for a world of hurt if we don't apply the same sort of protections we've applied to traditional software development against the ecosystem that supports LLM development and all the tool chains around it. Because we say LLM, but there's all these different like vector databases and all these different providers and all these different things that kind of are part of the secondary, tertiary systems around LLMs. All of the like ecosystem like libraries used to interact with those things. And honestly and truthfully, it's very, very scary. That part is, I agree. I think that's like terrifying. But in terms of like LLMs are going to take our jobs, or people are putting out FUD or whatever, don't worry about it. Just mess with it, play with it yourself, have some fun, read those papers, take what you can, dump what you can't. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah. Well, and that's traditionally been my takeaway as well, right? Like the way that new tools come about traditionally, like they don't do as well as the entrenched players, right? In the DAS space. Of course, an LLM is not going to be able to replace your DAS right now. It's not. But the ability for it to make requests, to do some certain things, to do decisionings based on that, we can see, hey, maybe this is some time where we should be spending time, right? That we should be developing these features and this ability, because it eventually it will come into play, and it probably will be better than DAST, or can replace DAST in the future. And I think that's all that article necessarily was, right?
Any product that doesn't try to use this contextualized ability to, and I say contextualized because it's really what we're talking about. You can use it to, deterministic is pattern matching, right? With some bells and whistles and all that. But probabilistic gets a very, very different. It's very, very different, right? I guess what I would say is, when it comes to context, it's not just the context that you provide the LLM, right? Because we all know that you give it context. Well, most people that work with it know that you give it context, and that's how context could be information about the application that you're asking a question about. Context could be, or if you're doing something else, if you're like giving it some network analysis, network traffic, and saying, here's here's some patterns that maybe have stuck out in the past or whatever. Context can be anything. But also remember that you can use these technologies to produce context, to give you information about whatever, right? And so all I'm trying to say is, any product that doesn't use that sort of capability, or doesn't even try to go down that path, to me, I don't see how they'll compete with anyone who does. I just don't see how that would.
They're going to get left
if you're
behind
pure
eventually.
deterministic, yeah.
Yep.
If you're pure deterministic forever, cool. Like, yeah, we evolved. But anyways,
yeah,
those are my random ass thoughts for today.
No, it's all good. Yeah, we've been going for a while. Like I knew we were going to when we hit that supply chain, stuff, right? Like, so
we went over an hour.
Yeah, we did. So yeah, continue the conversation. Join us in Slack. Thanks again to everyone for listening today, for interacting. Yeah, and otherwise, we will be back next week. Sign up for training if you can make it. KernelCon's in a few weeks, and we'd love to see you there. Yeah. Anything else, Ken, before we close it out today?
I think I should shut up. No, I'm done.
No more rants. It's all good. Sweet. All right. Well, we'll see everybody online. Thanks again for listening. Ciao.